Jiho wiped his greasy hands on his work apron and looked at the broken phone on his repair bench. The screen was cracked in 3 places and the charging port was completely fried. Just another normal Tuesday night at his small electronics shop. In Seoul, he had been fixing phones, laptops, and computers for 5 years now, and thought he had seen every type of damage possible. Clock on the wall showed 11 p.m., which meant he still had 2 more hours before he could close up and go home. His stomach rumbled loudly, reminding him that he had only eaten a small bowl of rice for dinner. The shop was quiet except for the gentle hum of his soldering iron, and the distant sound of traffic outside. Suddenly the entire world turned white. A flash of light, brighter than the sun, filled the sky, making Jiho cover his eyes with his hands. The windows of his shop rattled and car alarms started going off everywhere. He rushed outside to see what was happening and watched in amazement as a massive object streaked across the night sky like a burning mountain. The thing was huge, easily the size of 3 city blocks, and it was falling fast toward the Han River. Flames and sparks trailed behind it. As it crashed into the water with a sound like thunder, the impact sent giant waves rushing toward both sides of the river and made the ground shake under Jiho's feet. People started coming out of their apartments and shops, all pointing at the river and talking excitedly in worried voices. Some were taking pictures with their phones, while others were calling the police. Jiho heard sirens in the distance, getting closer and closer. Within minutes, military helicopters appeared overhead, shining bright spotlights down on the crash site. Soldiers and emergency workers began setting up barriers around the river to keep people away. Nobody knew what had crashed, but everyone could tell it was not from Earth. The object was too big and too strange looking to be any kind of airplane or satellite. While everyone was focused on the main crash site, Jiho noticed something else. A smaller object had broken away from the big ship during the crash, and it had landed somewhere in the industrial area near his shop. Most people had not seen it because they were all looking at the spectacular crash in the river. Jiho felt his curiosity getting the better of him. He had always been the type of person who wanted to understand how things worked, and this was definitely something he had never seen before. He grabbed a flashlight from his shop and started walking toward where he thought the smaller object had landed. The industrial area was dark and quiet, with only a few street lights working. Most of the buildings were old warehouses and small factories that were closed for the night. Jiho walked carefully between the buildings, listening for any unusual sounds and looking for signs of where the object might have crashed. After about 10 minutes of searching, he found it. The thing looked like a large egg made of silver metal, about the size of a small car. It had crashed into a pile of old shipping containers, which had probably helped soften the impact. The surface of the object was covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dark, and Jiho could hear a soft humming sound coming from inside. As he got closer, he noticed that part of the shell had cracked open during the crash. Through the crack he could see lights blinking inside, some red, some blue, and some colors he did not have names for. The humming sound was getting weaker, which made Jiho think that whatever was inside might be in trouble. He found what looked like a door or hatch on one side of the object. The symbols around it were glowing brighter than the others, and when he touched them, the door slowly opened with a soft hissing sound. Inside was the most amazing thing Jiho had ever seen. The walls were covered with panels full of lights and displays that showed information in symbols he could not read. Everything had a smooth, curved design, like it had been grown rather than built, and the air inside smelled like flowers and electricity mixed together. In the center of the small space was a chair or bed with someone lying on it. The person was definitely not human, but she was close enough that Jiho could tell she was female. Her skin had a blue tint to it, like someone had mixed blue paint with normal skin color, and she had small crystal-like objects embedded along her temples that sparkled. In the light, her hair was long and silver, and she was wearing clothes made of material that seemed to shift colors as the light hit. She was unconscious and breathing very slowly, which worried Jiho because her breathing did not sound normal. It was too shallow and too fast, like she was not getting enough air. He looked around and realized that many of the panels and displays were dark or showing what looked like error messages. Sparks were coming from several places in the walls, and there was a burning smell in the air that meant something electrical was seriously wrong. Jiho had fixed enough broken electronics to recognize the signs of a power system that was about to fail. Completely, without really thinking about it, he started examining the damaged systems. The design was completely alien, but electricity and circuits followed the same basic rules everywhere. Jiho could see where power lines had been damaged in the crash and where circuit boards had been fried by electrical surges. It was like looking at a computer that had been struck by lightning. He ran back to his shop and grabbed his toolbox along with some spare parts and wire. Working quickly, he began making emergency repairs to the life support system. The alien technology was incredibly advanced, but the basic principles were the same as fixing any electronic device. As he worked connecting wires and bypassing damaged circuits, something strange began to happen. The ship itself seemed to wake up. Lights that had been dark started glowing again, and displays began showing new information. A voice started speaking, but not in any language Jiho had ever heard. The words sounded musical and flowing like water over stones. Then suddenly the voice switched to Korean, but it was broken and halting, like someone learning the language from a textbook. "Welcome, Master Engineer," the voice said. "This unit expresses gratitude for repair assistance. Please identify yourself for command registration." Jiho looked around, confused, not sure where the voice was coming from or who it was talking to. The only people in the ship were him and the unconscious alien woman. "I am Jiho," he said, feeling foolish for talking to empty air. "I was just trying to help fix the life support." Acknowledged. "Master Engineer Jiho," the voice replied immediately. "Registration complete. Command protocols activated. Welcome aboard, Captain." The word "Captain" made Jiho stop working and stare at the nearest display, which was now showing what looked like status reports and system diagnostics. Somehow he could understand the information even though it was written in alien symbols. "Captain," he repeated. "What do you mean, Captain? I am not a captain. I just fix phones and computers." The voice seemed confused by this statement. Analysis indicates Master Engineer Jiho demonstrates superior technical capabilities. Only beings of advanced development can interface with this unit's systems. Therefore, Master Engineer Jiho must hold command rank. Before Jiho could argue with this strange logic, the alien woman began to stir. She opened eyes that were the color of deep ocean water and looked around in confusion when she saw Jiho standing over her with tools in his hands. She sat up quickly and started speaking rapidly in the same musical language he had heard from the ship. The ship's voice translated for him. "Pilot Nara expresses confusion about human presence." Pilot Nara requests explanation of current situation. Jiho tried to explain what had happened, how he had seen the crash and found her ship and tried to repair the life support system. But every time he suggested that maybe Nara should be in charge of her own ship, the computer voice politely but firmly disagreed. "Negative, Captain Jiho," the voice said. "Master Engineer capabilities demonstrate clear authority over this unit." Pilot Nara acknowledged as crew member, but command remains with Master Engineer. Nara looked just as confused as Jiho felt. She spoke to the ship in her own language, but the computer gave her the same answer it had given Jiho. Jiho realized he was in a very strange situation. He had just wanted to help save someone's life, but now an alien spaceship thought he was its captain and would not listen to anyone else. And judging by the worried expression on Nara's face, this was going to be much more complicated than fixing a broken phone. The next morning, Jiho sat in his repair shop staring at a cup of cold coffee and wondering if the previous night had been some kind of strange dream, but the alien device sitting on his workbench proved it had all been real. Nara had given him a small communication unit so they could talk to each other. The device looked like a piece of smooth glass, but when Nara spoke into her matching unit, her words came out of his device in perfect Korean. It was the most advanced translation technology he had ever seen, and it worked better than any human-made translator. Was what the ship called itself, and it had been very polite but very stubborn about the command situation every time. Jiho tried to explain that he was just a repair technician, and that Nara should be the captain. Dalnam would give the same response. Master Engineer Jiho possesses superior technical integration capabilities, the ship's voice would say through the communicator. Only advanced beings can successfully interface with core systems. Therefore, Master Engineer Jiho maintains command authority. Nara had tried explaining the situation in her own language, but Dalnam was just as stubborn with her. The ship seemed to think that because Jiho could repair their technology, He must be some kind of super advanced engineer from a highly developed civilization. The truth was that Jiho had no idea how he had been able to fix the alien systems. He had just looked at the damaged circuits and somehow understood what needed to be connected, where it was like reading a book written in a language he had never seen before, but somehow knowing what all the words meant through. The communicator Nara explained more about her situation. She was part of something called the Galactic Confederation, which was like a big group of different alien species that worked together. Her job was to pilot scout ships and explore new areas of space, but 3 days ago everything had gone wrong. An enemy called the Void Hunters had attacked her home system. These Void Hunters were not alive like Nara and her people. Instead, they were machines that traveled from star to star, eating entire planets and turning everything into more machinist. Nara's squadron had been trying to evacuate civilians. When the Void Hunters arrived, the main evacuation ship had been damaged and forced to make an emergency landing on the nearest planet, which happened to be Earth. Now 300 refugees were trapped in the crashed ship at the bottom of the Han River. The ship was designed to survive underwater, but not forever. The power systems were failing and the life support would only last maybe 2 more days. Without help, all the refugees would die, but here was the biggest problem: the main ship would only respond to commands from Dalnim or another ship with the same authorization code. Since Dalnim thought Jiho was the captain, it would only obey orders that came from him. Korean military divers had tried to reach the main ship, but they could not get through the shields. The alien technology was too advanced for human equipment to handle, and even if they could get inside, they would not know how to operate the ships systems. Jiho felt sick to his stomach. 300 people were going to die, and somehow he was the only person who could save them, but he did not know anything about spaceships or alien technology. He fixed phones for a living, not star cruisers. I cannot do this, he told Nara through the communicator. I do not know how to fly spaceships or command alien crews. What if I make a mistake and get everyone killed? Nara looked at him with those deep blue eyes and spoke very seriously. Your people have a saying about necessity being the mother of invention. My people have studied your species for many years. We know that humans are very good at solving problems in ways that no one else thinks of. She explained that her people had been using the same technology for thousands of years. They had manuals and procedures for everything, and they always followed the rules exactly. But sometimes following the rules was not enough. The way you repaired my ship last night, she said, no engineer from my people would have thought to try those connections you used. Methods that should not work according to our science, but they worked perfectly. Jiho looked at the alien device on his workbench and realized she was right. He had not followed any manual or procedure. He had just looked at the broken system and figured out what it needed. That was how he fixed everything in his shop. Maybe that was exactly what the refugees needed: someone who would not worry about doing things the right way, but would just focus on doing things that work through Dalnim. Jiho learned more about the situation. The main ship was sending out a distress signal, but it was getting weaker every hour. The hull was strong enough to keep the water out, but the power systems had been damaged in the crash. Korean naval ships were surrounding the crash site, but they could not do anything to help. The aliens inside were slowly running out of air, and there was no way for human rescuers to communicate with them. Dalnim could reach the main ship and talk to the people inside, but the little escape pod was not designed for underwater rescue operations. It would need major modifications to be able to dock with the larger ship and transfer. Pioplajo spent the morning learning about the escape pods systems. Dalnim was very patient and explained everything in simple terms. The ship could fly in space or in atmosphere, and it had basic life support for up to 10 people. It also had something called a universal docking system that could connect to any confederation ship. The problem was that the docking system needed more power than the little ship could generate, and the life support would have to work much harder to keep everyone alive during the rescue. But Jiho had an idea. What if we do not try to rescue everyone at once? He asked, what if we make multiple trips and take just a few people each time? Dalnim calculated the possibilities. That approach would require 17 separate trips, and the main ship's power would fail before trip number 12. Then, what if we give the main ship more power? Jiho asked, can we connect our power systems to theirs? That is not possible according to standard procedures, Dalnim replied. Escape pods are not designed for power transfer operations. Saya smiled. That was Exactly the kind of rule-following thinking that Nara had said would not work. Show me the power systems, he told Dalnim. I want to understand how everything connects. For the next several hours, Jiho studied the escape pod's power systems with the same focus he used when repairing complex electronics. Dalnim showed him detailed diagrams and explained how each component worked. The more he learned, the more excited he became. The alien power systems were incredibly advanced, but they followed the same basic principles as any electrical system. He began to see possibilities that the original designers had never considered. What if we reroute power from the engines? He suggested. We do not need to fly very fast underwater. That would reduce available power by 30%. Dalnim calculated. Still insufficient for power transfer. What about the artificial gravity system? Jiho asked. Do we really need that during a rescue operation? Disabling artificial gravity would be uncomfortable for passengers, Dalnim said, but it would free up another 20% power. Life support systems, Jiho continued. Can we run those at minimum levels? Dalnim was quiet for a long moment. Running calculations combining all suggested modifications would provide sufficient power for limited transfer operations. However, these modifications violate multiple safety protocols. Jiho laughed. Perfect. If we were worried about safety protocols, we would not be trying to rescue 300 people from the bottom of a river. As the sun began to set, Jiho realized that he was actually starting to enjoy this challenge. It was like fixing the world's most complicated electronic device, except instead of making a phone work again, he was trying to save hundreds of lives. And for the first time since this whole adventure started, he was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, they could actually pull it off. The modifications took all night to complete. Jiho worked with tools that seemed to change shape based on what he needed while Dalnim guided him through the process. The ship had something called molecular fabricators that could create new parts from basic materials. It was like having a 3D printer that could make anything. Nara helped by explaining how different systems work together. Her people called it harmonic integration because all the ship's components had to work in perfect balance. Like instruments in an orchestra, if one part was changed, everything else had to be adjusted to match. By dawn, they had completely rebuilt the escape pod's power distribution system. Jiho had connected systems that were never meant to work together and created power pathways that did not exist in any Confederation manual. The ship could now generate 3 times its normal power output, but there was a problem. The Korean military had decided that the alien crash site was too dangerous to ignore. Navy ships had surrounded the area and fighter jets were patrolling overhead. They were not trying to attack, but they were definitely not going to let any alien ships fly around freely. Dalnim detected the military presence as soon as they powered up the engines, warning multiple hostile aircraft approaching this position. Recommend immediate evasive action. They are not hostile, Jiho said quickly. They are just scared and trying to protect their people. Dalnim seemed confused by this explanation. Scanning aircraft weapon systems, multiple missile locks detected. How can they be non-hostile while targeting this unit? Jiho realized he was going to have to learn more than just technical skills if he wanted to command an alien ship. He needed to understand how to deal with military forces that saw him as a potential threat. The first test came sooner than expected. To Korean Air Force jets appeared overhead, flying in tight formation. Dalnim sensors showed that they were equipped with air-to-air missiles and their weapon systems were powered up. The pilots were probably just as nervous as everyone else, but they had orders to intercept any alien aircraft. Captain Jiho, Dalnim said, formal procedures require immediate defensive action against hostile forces. Shall I activate shield systems? No, Jiho said, thinking fast. Can you open a communication channel to those aircraft? Dalnim was confused again. This unit is not equipped with human communication protocols. Then can you translate what I say into radio signals that they can understand? After several minutes of technical adjustments, Dalnim managed to establish contact. This is civilian rescue vessel requesting permission to approach crash site, Jiho said into the ship's communication system. The response came back immediately in Korean. Unknown aircraft, identify yourself and land immediately. You are in restricted airspace. This is Jiho Kim from Seoul. I am assisting with rescue operations for the survivors in the river. I need to reach the main ship or everyone inside will die. There was a long pause before the radio crackled again. Kim, you claim to be Korean, but you are flying an alien aircraft. Explain how this is possible. Jiho took a deep breath and told the truth about finding Nara and accidentally becoming the ship's captain. He explained about the 300 refugees who were running out of air, and how he was the only person who could save them. The military pilots seemed just as confused as everyone else, but they agreed to escort the escape pod to the crash site as long as Jiho did not make any sudden moves or try to fly away. They would not shoot. Flying the escape pod was nothing like driving a car or even flying an airplane. Downham handled most of the actual piloting, but Jiho had to make decisions about speed, direction, and approach angles. The ship responded to his thoughts almost as much as his voice commands. When they reached the crash site, Jiho got his first good look at the main alien ship. It was huge, even bigger than he had imagined from the news reports. The front part was buried deep in the river bottom, while the back part stuck up above the water like a small island. Dalnim began scanning the main ship immediately, and the news was not good. Power levels at 40% and falling. Life support systems operating at minimum capacity. Estimated time to critical failure 18 hours. 18 hours to save 300 people, and he still had not figured out how to actually dock with the main ship underwater. The docking procedure was incredibly complex. The escape pod had to match the exact position and angle of the main ship's docking port, then create an airtight seal while both ships were moving with the river current. One small mistake and both ships could be damaged. Nara had done docking procedures hundreds of times, but always in space where there was no water current or weather to worry about. Underwater docking was something completely different, but Jiho had an idea that came from his experience fixing electronics. What if we do not try to make a perfect connection, he suggested. What if we just get close enough to transfer power and people? Dalnim ran calculations on this approach. The precision requirements would be reduced by 70%, however the connection would be unstable. Unstable is better than impossible, Jiho replied. They spent the next several hours practicing approach maneuvers while Dalnim refined the modified docking system. Instead of a rigid mechanical connection, they would use magnetic fields and flexible tubes that could adjust to movement. The first actual docking attempt was terrifying. The main ship was much larger than it looked from the surface, and its hull was covered with damage from the crash. Jiho had to guide the escape pod through twisted metal and broken systems while trying to find the docking port. When they finally made contact, the whole escape pod shook and groaned as the magnetic clamps engaged. There was a loud hissing sound as the airlock systems activated, and then Dalnim announced connection established, airlock sealed, prepare for passenger transfer. The first group of refugees were children who had been chosen because they used less air and would have the best chance of survival. They looked completely human except for slight differences in skin color and eye shape. Their parents had sent them first, hoping that if the rescue failed, at least the youngest would be saved. Seeing those scared kids made Jiho realize that this was not just about fixing a technical problem anymore. These were real people whose lives depended on his ability to figure out solutions to problems he had never imagined. Over the next 12 hours, they made 7 trips between the ships. Each trip brought more refugees to safety, but also used more of the main ship's remaining power. The docking procedure got easier with practice, but the time pressure kept getting worse. On the 8th trip, something went wrong. The main ship's power fluctuated during docking, causing the magnetic clamps to fail. The escape pod was thrown against the larger ship's hull with enough force to crack several external panels. Dalnim immediately started reporting system failures. Hull breach in Section 7. Life support down to 60%. Power systems overloading. Emergency repairs required. This was exactly what Jiho had been afraid of. One mistake and now both ships were in danger, but instead of panicking, he found himself getting angry. These people had already lost their homes to the void hunters, and now they were going to die because he could not figure out how to make alien technology work properly. Well, that was not going to happen, not if he had anything to say about it working faster than he had ever worked in his life. Jiho began emergency repairs while the ship was still underwater. The damaged hull sections had to be sealed, the power distribution had to be rerouted, and the docking system had to be recalibrated, all while 50 scared refugees waited in the passenger compartment. Nara helped by managing the refugees and keeping them calm, while Jiho focused on the technical problems. Dalnim provided tools and materials while calculating how much time they had before critical system failures. 2 hours later, they were back in business with a ship that was actually more efficient than before. The emergency repairs had forced Jiho to optimize systems that he had not touched during the original modifications. By the end of the day, they had rescued everyone. The main ship was empty, and the escape pod had made 14 successful trips without losing a single refugee as they flew back to shore with the last group of survivors. Jiho realized that somewhere during the long day he had stopped thinking of himself as just a repair technician who had stumbled into an impossible situation. He was starting to feel like a captain. 3 days after the rescue operation, Jiho was trying to get his normal life back. The refugee situation had made international news, and every government in the world wanted to talk to him about alien technology, but all he really wanted was to go back to fixing phones and laptops in his quiet shop. That changed when Dalnim woke him up at 4 a.m. with an emergency alert. Captain Jiho, immediate attention required. Void Hunter signatures detected at edge of solar system. Jiho sat up in bed, feeling cold fear in his stomach. He had hoped that the Void Hunters would not be able to track the refugees to Earth, but apparently he had been wrong. The mechanical aliens were coming, and they would arrive in less than 2 days. Through the communication device, Nara explained what humanity was facing. The Void Hunters were not like any normal enemy. They did not want territory or resources in the way that living beings understood those things. Instead, they wanted to convert everything into more machines. A typical Void Hunter ship was the size of a city and covered with mechanical arms that could take apart planets piece by piece. They would start by stripping the moon for raw materials, then move on to Earth itself. Every person, animal, and plant would be broken down into basic elements and rebuilt into more Void Hunter units. The worst part was that they learned from every civilization they destroyed. Each new planet made them stronger and more adaptable. They had been doing this for thousands of years, and no one had ever found a way to stop them. But maybe no one had ever tried fighting them the way humans would fight. Jiho spent the next day learning everything he could about Void Hunter technology through Dalnim's databases. The mechanical aliens were incredibly advanced, but they were also predictable. They used the same tactics and strategies every time because those methods had always worked before. They would establish orbital superiority, first using massive ships to destroy any space-based defenses. Then they would send down smaller harvester units to begin converting the planet's surface. Finally, they would install giant processing plants to turn all the raw materials into new Void Hunter ships. Earth had no space-based defenses to speak of, and certainly no weapons that could damage city-sized alien ships, but maybe that was actually an advantage. Instead of trying to fight the Void Hunters in space where they were strongest, what if Earth could turn the entire planet into a fortress? Jiho brought this idea to a meeting with Korean military officials and scientists from around the world. Most of them thought he was crazy, but a few were desperate enough to listen. The refugee crisis had proven that his unconventional approaches could work when normal methods failed. The plan that developed over the next 18 hours was the most ambitious engineering project in human history. They would use Confederation technology to turn Earth's communication satellites into weapons platforms. The planet's magnetic field would provide power, while modified alien shield generators would protect major cities. It should have been impossible, but Jiho had learned not to worry about whether something should work. He focused on whether it could work and whether they had enough time to make it happen. Key was combining human manufacturing with alien technology. Human factories could produce components much faster than Confederation systems, but they needed alien designs to make those components effective against Void Hunter ships. Working with Nara and a growing team of human engineers, Jiho began designing hybrid systems that used Earth materials and alien science. The designs had to be simple enough for human workers to build, but advanced enough to damage ships that had conquered entire civilizations. Dahl was incredibly helpful during this process. The ship's databases contained detailed information about Void Hunter weaknesses and tactical patterns. More importantly, Dalnim could communicate with other Confederation systems to coordinate the defense. As Word spread about the approaching threat. More refugees came forward to help. Many of them were engineers and scientists who had been forced to abandon their home worlds when the Void Hunters arrived. They brought knowledge about defensive systems that had failed before and ideas about what might work better. The international response was unlike anything in human history. Governments that had been enemies for decades suddenly started working together to build the defense network. Russian rocket technology was combined with American satellite systems and Japanese manufacturing. Chinese rare earth materials were processed using German precision machinery, but it was the individual human workers who made the real difference. Confederation engineering was precise and logical, but human workers added something that no alien had ever seen before. They improvised and adapted, and found ways to make things work even when the original designs had problems. Factory workers in Detroit figured out how to mass-produce alien power cores using car manufacturing equipment. Software programmers in India wrote code that could integrate human computers with Confederation databases. Farmers in Brazil grew special crops that could be processed into materials for shield generators. Every solution created new problems that needed more solutions, but somehow the network of improvised fixes and creative adaptations held together. It was like building a skyscraper out of spare parts and good intentions. On the morning that the Void Hunter fleet arrived in Earth's solar system, the defense network was as ready as it would ever be. Hundreds of modified satellites surrounded the planet, each one equipped with weapons that had never been tested in real combat. Shield generators powered by the magnetic field created protective barriers over every major city on Earth. Eho found himself in command of the entire system from a hastily built command center in Seoul. Dalnam had been connected to computer networks around the world and could coordinate defensive actions faster than any human commander, but the final decisions about strategy and tactics were up to Jeho. As the Void Hunter ships approached Earth, they looked exactly like Nara had described them. Massive geometric shapes covered with mechanical tentacles and glowing with the energy of 1,000 absorbed civilizations. Each ship was a monument to the death of entire species, but for the first time in their long history, the Void Hunters were about to encounter something they had never seen before: a species that refused to follow the rules about how wars were supposed to be fought. When the first Void Hunter ship entered weapons range of the satellite network, Jeho gave the order to open fire. The response was immediate and devastating. Modified communication satellites turned into railguns that fired metal slugs at incredible speeds. Weather monitoring systems became electromagnetic pulse generators that could disrupt mechanical systems. The Void Hunters had shields that could stop any conventional weapon, but they had never encountered attacks that came from civilian infrastructure. The satellites were not military targets, so they had been ignored during the initial tactical analysis. The first Void Hunter ship began to show damage. Its companions started adapting their strategies. They began targeting the satellites, but discovered that destroying communication systems also disrupted their own coordination networks. Jeho realized that this was exactly the kind of chaotic, unpredictable situation where human thinking worked best. The Void Hunters were trying to fight a logical, methodical battle, but Earth was not cooperating with their expectations. Time to get creative, he told Dalnam, and began implementing the second phase of his plan. If the Void Hunters wanted to fight a normal space battle, they were going to be very disappointed. The second phase of Jeho's plan was even more unconventional than the first. If the Void Hunters expected to fight against military targets, then Earth would attack them with civilian infrastructure. Instead, weather control satellites that normally track storms became weapons that could create localized electromagnetic disturbances. GPS systems that guided lost drivers started feeding false information to Void Hunter navigation networks. Internet servers that hosted social media began broadcasting confusing signals that overloaded mechanical analysis systems. The Void Hunters had conquered hundreds of civilizations, but they had never fought an enemy that used entertainment systems as weapons. From his command center, Jeho watched as the alien ships tried to adapt to each new attack pattern. Their mechanical minds were incredibly fast at processing information, but they needed predictable data to work with. Human tactics were specifically designed to be unpredictable. When the Void Hunters sent hunter-killer drones to destroy the satellite network, Jiho activated the electromagnetic storm generators. Weather satellites created invisible walls of charged particles that fried the drone's electronics when they tried to land ground forces. He triggered coordinated internet outages that confused their landing guidance systems, but the most effective weapon was something that no military strategist had ever considered. Dalam had discovered that Void Hunter ships use quantum communication networks to coordinate their attacks. The networks were incredibly secure and had never been successfully hacked by any known civilization. But they had one weakness that no one had ever thought to exploit: they could not process paradoxical or irrational data. Working with computer programmers from around the world, Jiho began developing what he called the Chaos Virus. It was not really a virus in the traditional sense. Instead, it was a collection of human jokes, paradoxes, and deliberately confusing information that would overload mechanical logic systems. The idea came from his experience with broken electronics. Sometimes a computer would get stuck in an endless loop trying to process corrupted data. The only way to fix it was to force a restart. But Void Hunter ships could not be restarted once they became confused. They stayed confused. Nara helped by explaining how Confederation computers handled irrational data. Her people systems were designed to recognize paradoxes and set them aside without trying to solve them, but Void Hunter networks had been built for pure efficiency. They tried to process everything. The first test of the Chaos Virus was on a single Void Hunter scout ship that had been separated from the main fleet. Dalnim transmitted a package of data that included mathematical paradoxes from ancient Greek philosophy, nonsense poetry from human literature, and several thousand internet memes. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The scout ship's external lights began flashing in random patterns, its mechanical arms started moving in circles for no apparent reason, and its communication systems began broadcasting what sounded like electronic screaming. Within minutes, the ship had stopped responding to orders from the main fleet. Its weapons went offline, its shields fluctuated wildly, and it began flying in random directions. Eventually, it crashed into one of its companion ships, causing damage to both vessels. Jiho realized they had found the Void Hunters' weakness. The mechanical aliens were so focused on logical efficiency that they had never developed defenses against pure chaos. They could adapt to any rational strategy, but they could not handle problems that had no logical solution. Over the next 6 hours, the Chaos Virus spread through the Void Hunter fleet like wildfire. Each infected ship became a source of more chaotic transmissions that confused other ships. The mechanical coordination that made them so effective began breaking down as individual units started acting independently, but the Void Hunters were not helpless. They began adapting by isolating their communication networks and relying on pre-programmed behaviors. Instead of coordinated tactics, individual ships became more dangerous even as the overall fleet became less organized. This was when the human volunteers became crucial. Thousands of people around the world had signed up to pilot improvised fighters built from alien technology and human materials. Most of them were civilian pilots or even just people who played flight simulator games, but they had one advantage that professional military pilots lacked: were used to dealing with equipment that did not work properly. The improvised fighters were held together with spare parts and good intentions. They broke down, constantly required creative repairs, and never performed exactly the same way twice, but human pilots had learned to work with unreliable systems, while Void Hunter tactical programs assumed that all equipment would function perfectly. When a human fighter's weapons failed, the pilot would ram the enemy ship. When the engines overheated, they would use the excess heat to power makeshift weapons. When the navigation system stopped working, they would follow other pilots and hope for the best. The combination of chaos infected Void Hunter ships and wildly improvising human pilots created a battle unlike anything in galactic history. There were no formation flights or coordinated tactics, just hundreds of individual duels between mechanical precision and human creative. Italia coordinated the overall defense, but he could not control the details. Each pilot made their own decisions about targets and tactics. The randomness was exactly what they needed because the Void Hunters could not predict what would happen next. As the battle continued, more Void Hunter ships became infected with the Chaos Virus. Their formation began to collapse as individual ships started attacking each other or flying off in random directions. Some ships tried to retreat, but their navigation systems were too confused to calculate escape routes. The turning point came when the largest Void Hunter ship, the one that served as the fleet command center, became infected. The virus spread through its central processing systems faster than the automatic defenses could respond. Within minutes, the command ship was broadcasting random data to the entire fleet. Mathematical equations mixed with human poetry. Technical specifications got jumbled together with cooking recipes. Navigation coordinates were replaced with song lyrics. The infection spread exponentially as each ship tried to process the chaotic information every attempt to analyze the data created more confusion until the entire fleet was effectively paralyzed. Jiho watched from his command center as city-sized ships that had destroyed entire civilizations began spinning helplessly in space. Some crashed into each other, others attempted to retreat but ended up flying deeper into the solar system. A few tried to land on Earth, but their guidance systems were so confused that they missed the planet entirely. The battle that was supposed to determine the fate of humanity had turned into a cosmic comedy of errors as the last functional Void Hunter ship limped away from Earth, broadcasting confused signals in 17 different languages. Jiho realized that they had achieved something that no civilization in galactic history had ever managed. They had not just defeated the Void Hunters, they had driven them completely insane. The mechanical fleet that had been a terror to the galaxy for thousands of years was now wandering aimlessly through space trying to solve mathematical problems that had no answers and understand jokes that made no sense. But even as he celebrated the victory, Jiho knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy was full of threats that humanity had never imagined, and Earth had just announced to everyone that humans were not going to follow the normal rules. That was probably going to create as many problems as it solved. 6 months after the Void Hunter fleet had retreated in confusion, Jiho stood in what used to be his small repair shop in Seoul. The space had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between an electronics laboratory and an alien command center. The walls were covered with displays showing information from across the galaxy. Human-built computers worked alongside Confederation systems, while repair tools from Earth sat next to molecular fabricators that could create anything imaginable. But the biggest change was not in the technology, it was in the people working there. Engineers from 12 different alien species worked alongside human technicians, sharing knowledge that had been kept separate for thousands of years. A young woman from Tokyo was teaching a crystalline alien how to repair human circuit boards, while a refugee engineer explained gravitational field theory to a group of university students. Dalam had evolved too. The ship's artificial intelligence had started developing what could only be called a personality. It made jokes now and had opinions about human music. It had also become fiercely protective of what it called its extended crew, which included everyone who worked at the academy. Captain Jiho Dalnam said through the communication system, the Galactic Confederation Council has transmitted another formal invitation to address their assembly. Jiho sighed. This was the 15th invitation in the past month. The Confederation wanted Earth to join their alliance officially, and they wanted Jiho to represent humanity at the galactic government. But he was not sure that was the right thing to do. The problem was that humanity had accidentally become famous throughout the galaxy. The defeat of the Void Hunters had been broadcast across hundreds of worlds, and the story had grown with each telling. Some versions claimed that humans could defeat any enemy through pure chaos. Others suggested that Earth technology was millions of years ahead of Confederation science. None of it was true, but the truth was almost as impressive. Humans had taken alien technology that they barely understood and used it in ways that the original designers had never imagined. They had solved problems through creativity and stubbornness rather than logic and planning. That combination was exactly what the galaxy needed. Through Nara, Jiho had learned about dozens of civilizations that were facing problems they could not solve. Climate disasters that followed all the scientific models but could not be stopped. Ancient machines that worked perfectly but could not be repaired when they broke. Political conflicts that made perfect sense to both sides but could never be resolved. Every problem had been analyzed by the best minds in the galaxy using the most advanced technology available, but analysis and technology had not been enough. They needed fresh perspectives and unconventional solutions. They needed humans, but Jiho was worried about what would happen if Earth became too involved in galactic politics. Humans were good at solving problems, but they were also good at creating new ones. The same creativity that had defeated the Void Hunters could easily cause diplomatic disasters if it was not handled carefully. His solution was typically human and typically unconventional. Instead of joining the Confederation as a member world, Earth would become something that had never existed before, an independent problem-solving center that could work with any civilization without being controlled by any government. The Seoul Academy for Creative Engineering was just the beginning. Similar schools were being established in cities around the world, each one focused on bringing together human creativity and alien knowledge. The goal was not to replace existing education systems, but to supplement them with new ways of thinking. Students would learn conventional engineering and science, but they would also study human approaches to problem-solving. Improvisation and adaptation would be taught. Alongside mathematics and physics, art and music would be considered just as important as technology, because creative thinking required more than just technical knowledge. The first major test of this approach came when the Helix Republic requested help with their energy crisis. Their star was aging faster than expected, and their entire civilization would need to relocate within the next 100 years. Moving billions of people across interstellar distances was a logistical nightmare that had never been attempted before. The Confederation had offered to help, but their solutions involved building massive evacuation fleets that would take centuries to complete. The Helix Republic did not have centuries, they had decades at most. Jiho and his team approached the problem differently. Instead of trying to move the people, what if they moved the star? The idea sounded insane, but it was based on human experience with civil engineering projects like building dams to redirect rivers or creating artificial islands in the ocean. Sometimes it was easier to change the environment than to adapt to it. Working with Helix scientists and Confederation engineers, the Academy team designed a stellar engineering project that would use controlled gravitational fields to extend the star's lifespan. The technology existed, but no one had ever thought to use it on such a massive scale. The project would take 50 years to complete, but it would allow the Helix Republic to stay in their home system for another 1,000 years. It was ambitious, dangerous, and completely unprecedented. It was also exactly the kind of solution that no one else would have considered. As more civilizations heard about the Academy's work, requests for help began arriving daily. Problems that had been considered unsolvable were suddenly being approached from entirely new directions. A mining world where the tunnels kept collapsing was saved by using human tunnel boring techniques combined with alien materials. A agricultural planet where crops were failing learned to use human companion planting methods with genetically modified alien plants. A space station with recurring technical failures was fixed by applying human troubleshooting methods to alien systems. Each success led to more requests and more opportunities to share knowledge. Every human student who learned alien science became a bridge between different ways of thinking. Every alien engineer who understood human creativity became an advocate for unconventional solutions. But the most important changes were happening in the students themselves. Human children who grew up working with alien technology developed problem-solving skills that neither species could achieve alone. Alien students who learned human approaches to creativity brought new perspectives back to their homeworlds. Nara had become the Academy's coordinator for alien relations. She helped translate not just languages, but entire ways of thinking. Her own approach to engineering had changed dramatically after working with humans for 6 months. She had started taking risks and trying solutions that did not appear in any manual Nim had appointed itself as the Academy's transportation coordinator. The escape pod had been modified so many times that it was barely recognizable as a Confederation vessel. It could now travel faster than most military ships while carrying a classroom full of students and equipment. But the real measure of success came from an unexpected source. A message arrived from the edge of the galaxy where the confused Void Hunter fleet was still wandering aimlessly. The mechanical aliens had been trying for months to debug their systems and return to normal operations, but every time they thought they had solved the Problem, they would encounter another paradox or contradiction that sent them back into chaos instead of becoming angry or seeking revenge. They had done something that surprised everyone. They had requested permission to send representatives to study at the academy the machines that had terrorized the